Sarah Martinez had always been invisible at the Riverside shooting range. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, she would arrive in her worn jeans and faded t-shirt, carrying nothing but her employee badge and a thermos of coffee. Her job was simple enough: replace the paper targets, sweep up brass casings, and occasionally help customers with basic questions about range safety. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills while she finished her nursing degree at the local community college. The range attracted all types of people. Wealthy businessmen came in with expensive custom rifles, hoping to impress their clients. Young couples showed up on date nights, giggling nervously as they tried to hit anything on the target. Police officers arrived for their mandatory training sessions, professional and focused. But it was the military personnel who always caught Sarah's attention. They moved differently than everyone else, with purpose, precision, and an awareness that seemed to extend beyond the shooting lanes. Sarah had grown up around firearms. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old. He believed every person should know how to handle a weapon safely, especially his daughter. Those weekend trips to his friend's farm had given Sarah a solid foundation in marksmanship, though she rarely mentioned this to anyone at work. She preferred to blend into the background, observing rather than participating. On this particular Thursday in March, the range was busier than usual. A group of Navy personnel had booked the far lanes for training exercises. Sarah watched them from the corner of her eye as she worked, noting their synchronized movements and the way they communicated with subtle hand signals. Their instructor was a tall man with graying hair and intense blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. The name tape on his uniform read Thompson, and the trident pin on his chest immediately identified him as a Navy SEAL. As Sarah worked her way down the lanes, replacing torn targets and checking the backstops, she couldn't help but notice the precision of the SEAL team's shooting. Their targets showed tight groupings that would make most recreational shooters weep with envy. But what struck her most was their discipline. They treated every shot as if lives depended on it, which she realized they probably did. Thompson's voice carried authority without being harsh. He corrected form, adjusted stances, and provided feedback with the patience of someone who understood that excellence required time to develop. Sarah found herself slowing her work just to listen to his instruction. His teaching style reminded her of her father: firm but encouraging, demanding but fair. When she reached the lane next to the SEAL team, Sarah became acutely aware of being watched. She glanced up to find Thompson observing her work with curious eyes. She had been extra careful to stay out of their way, but perhaps she was being too obvious in her attempts to remain invisible. "Excuse me, miss," Thompson called out, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the range. Sarah froze, certain she had somehow violated protocol or gotten too close to their training area. She turned slowly, her heart racing with the kind of nervousness that comes from unexpected attention. "Yes, sir," she managed, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. Up close, Thompson was even more intimidating than she had imagined. His presence filled the space around him, and his eyes held the kind of intensity that comes from years of high-stakes decision-making. "I've been watching you work," he said, and Sarah's stomach dropped. Had she done something wrong? Was she about to be fired for being too curious about their training? Thompson must have noticed her expression because his features softened slightly. "You move well around firearms. Most range employees are either completely uncomfortable or overly casual. You show proper respect for the weapons and awareness of your surroundings." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "My father taught me about gun safety when I was young," she replied simply, not wanting to oversell her limited experience. Thompson nodded approvingly. "Military?" "Vietnam. Army infantry. Good man, I'm sure. That kind of training shows." Thompson paused, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. "What's your name?" "Sarah Martinez." "Well, Sarah Martinez, I have a proposition for you." Thompson gestured toward his team, who had paused their training to observe this unexpected interaction. "We're working on some advanced marksmanship techniques today, and I'm always curious about natural ability versus learned skill. Would you be willing to take a few shots for us?" Sarah's mind raced. This had to be some kind of test or joke. She was just a range employee, not a trained operator. The idea of shooting in front of these elite warriors made her palms sweat. But there was something in Thompson's expression that suggested this wasn't a casual request. He was genuinely curious about something he had observed in her movements and behavior. "I don't want to interrupt your training, sir," Sarah said carefully, "and I'm not sure my supervisor would appreciate me shooting during work hours." Thompson smiled for the first time since she had noticed him. It transformed his entire face, revealing a warmth that his professional demeanor had hidden. "I already spoke with your supervisor. He's fine with it as long as safety protocols are followed." He paused, tilting his head slightly. "The question is whether you're willing to step outside your comfort zone." Sarah looked at the target downrange, then back at Thompson's expectant face. His team members had gathered closer now, their expressions mixing curiosity with skepticism. She could practically feel them wondering what their instructor saw in the quiet range employee who usually tried so hard to remain unnoticed. Something in Thompson's challenge awakened, a part of Sarah that had been dormant since her father's death 3 years earlier. He had always encouraged her to be brave, to never back down from an opportunity to prove herself. She could almost hear his voice telling her that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. "What kind of shooting are we talking about?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Thompson's smile widened. "Nothing too complicated. Just show me what your father taught you about marksmanship. Sometimes the fundamentals reveal more about a person than all the advanced techniques in the world." Sarah nodded slowly, her decision made. She had no idea that this moment would change the trajectory of her entire life, or that the rifle Thompson was about to place in her hands would unlock possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The rifle felt heavier than Sarah remembered. Thompson had handed her a standard military-issue M4, similar to what she had trained with years ago during a brief stint with her college ROTC program. That experience seemed like a lifetime ago now, buried under years of working multiple jobs and struggling to make ends meet. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the weapon. "Muscle memory fighting against nerves. Take your time," Thompson said quietly, his voice carrying none of the urgency she might have expected from a military instructor. "There's no pressure here. We're just curious to see what you can do." Sarah could feel the eyes of the entire SEAL team on her as she stepped up to the firing line. Their targets had been set at 100 yards, much farther than the typical 25-yard distance most recreational shooters used. The paper silhouettes looked impossibly small from where she stood, and Sarah felt a familiar knot of anxiety building in her chest. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to remember her father's voice from all those years ago. "Breathing is everything, Mija," he used to tell her. "The rifle doesn't miss. People miss. Control your breathing, control your heartbeat, and the rifle will do its job." Opening her eyes, Sarah assumed a shooting stance that felt rusty but familiar. She had always been tall for a woman, and the rifle seemed to find its natural place against her shoulder. Thompson said nothing, but she could sense his attention focused entirely on her form and positioning. The first shot surprised her. Not because she had forgotten to expect it, but because of how natural it felt. The rifle's recoil felt like greeting an old friend, familiar and comfortable despite the years that had passed. Through the spotting scope, she could see that her shot had hit the target, though not exactly where she had aimed. "Not bad," one of Thompson's men commented. "A little high and right, but on target." Sarah adjusted her sight picture and fired again. This time the shot felt more controlled, more intentional. The bullet hole appeared closer to the center of the target, and she felt a spark of confidence that had been missing from the first shot. "Better," Thompson observed. "Your father taught you well, but you're overthinking it now. Trust your instincts." The third shot was the one that changed everything. Sarah let her breathing settle into the rhythm her father had drilled into her years ago. She focused on the front sight post, letting the target blur slightly in the background. Her trigger pull was smooth and straight back, and she followed through just as she had been taught. The shot felt perfect from the moment she fired it. Through the spotting scope, one of the SEAL team members whistled low. "Dead center. That's a better shot than half my guys made today." Sarah lowered the rifle, unsure whether to feel proud or embarrassed by the attention. She had always been someone who preferred to succeed quietly, without drawing notice to herself, but there was something about Thompson's presence that made her want to prove she was worthy of his interest. "Keep going," Thompson encouraged. "You've got 7 more rounds in that magazine. Let's see what you can really do." The next 4 shots formed a tight group around the center of the target. Sarah found herself slipping into a zone she hadn't experienced since her father had been alive to coach her. The range noise faded into background static. Her breathing became automatic, and the rifle began to feel like an extension of her body rather than a separate tool. "Jesus," another SEAL muttered. "Where did you find her, Chief?" Thompson held up a hand for silence, his attention completely focused on Sarah's performance. She was clearly in what marksmen called the zone, that elusive state where conscious thought gave way to pure instinct and muscle memory. Sarah's final 2 shots were fired in rapid succession, each one placed precisely where she intended. When she finally lowered the rifle and stepped back from the firing line, the range fell unusually quiet. Even the other customers in the adjacent lanes had stopped shooting to watch this unexpected demonstration of skill. Thompson retrieved the target and walked back with it, his expression unreadable. When he held it up for everyone to see, Sarah felt her breath catch. 8 shots had formed a group smaller than her fist, all centered in the high-scoring rings of the target. It was the kind of shooting that would have been impressive for anyone, but for someone who claimed to be just a range employee, it was extraordinary. "Sarah," Thompson said, his voice carrying a gravity that made everyone lean in to listen, "what did you do before you started working here?" The question caught her off guard. She had expected praise for her shooting, or perhaps questions about her training. Instead, Thompson seemed more interested in her background, as if the shooting had confirmed something he had already suspected. "I've been working here for about 8 months, she replied carefully. "Before that, I was finishing my nursing prerequisites and working at a medical clinic. Before that," she hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I was in ROTC for 2 years in college, but I had to leave school when my father got sick." Thompson nodded slowly, pieces of a puzzle apparently falling into place in his mind. "The ROTC training explains some of it, but not all. Your shooting fundamentals are too solid for just 2 years of college military training, and your comfort level with the weapon suggests more recent experience." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks. She hadn't intended to mislead anyone, but she had also learned that admitting to certain experiences often led to uncomfortable questions. "My father and I used to shoot together regularly, even after I left school. He took marksmanship very seriously." "How seriously?" Thompson pressed gently. "He was a sniper in Vietnam," Sarah admitted quietly. 2 tours. He said shooting was a skill that might save my life someday, so he made sure I learned it properly." The reaction from Thompson's team was immediate and respectful. Being the daughter of a military sniper carried weight with these men, and suddenly Sarah's performance made complete sense to them. Thompson studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes seeming to look right through her. "Sarah, I'd like to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." Sarah nodded, unsure where this conversation was heading, but sensing it was important. "Have you ever considered putting those skills to use in a more professional capacity?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Sarah wasn't sure she was ready to understand. But something in Thompson's tone suggested this wasn't just casual curiosity. This was an opportunity, though for what she couldn't yet imagine. The conversation with Thompson haunted Sarah for weeks. She had given him a polite but non-committal answer about considering professional opportunities. But the truth was more complicated. The idea both terrified and intrigued her in ways she couldn't fully explain to herself. Her routine at the range continued unchanged on the surface. She arrived for her shifts, replaced targets, cleaned up after customers, and collected her paycheck every 2 weeks. But something fundamental had shifted inside her. The confidence she had felt while shooting Thompson's rifle lingered, manifesting in subtle ways throughout her daily life. She walked taller, spoke up more during her nursing classes, and found herself taking notice of details she had previously ignored. 3 weeks after their first encounter, Thompson returned to the range. This time he came alone, during the quiet afternoon hours when the facility was nearly empty. Sarah spotted him as soon as he walked through the door, her pulse quickening despite her efforts to remain calm and professional. "Hello, Sarah," he said, approaching the counter where she was organizing safety equipment. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" She nodded, gesturing toward the small office behind the counter. The space was cramped and cluttered with paperwork, but it offered privacy for whatever conversation Thompson had in mind. "I've been thinking about our discussion," he began without preamble, "about professional opportunities for someone with your skills." Sarah had been dreading and anticipating this moment in equal measure. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate whatever you're thinking, but I'm not military material. I'm just finishing nursing school and I have a pretty quiet life planned out for myself. Thompson smiled, the same warm expression that had surprised her during their first meeting. First, call me Jack, and second, I'm not talking about joining the military. At least not exactly. This caught Sarah's attention despite her reservations. What do you mean? Jack leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. The Navy has certain specialized training programs, civilian contractors who work alongside military personnel in various capacities. Some of these positions require individuals with very specific skill sets. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. What kind of positions? The kind that might interest someone with your background. Someone with advanced marksmanship skills, medical training, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Jack paused, studying her reaction. Someone who can blend in and observe without being noticed. The last comment hit home more than Sarah cared to admit. She had always prided herself on being invisible, on moving through spaces without drawing attention. It had never occurred to her that this might be a valuable professional skill. I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting, she said, carefully. Jack reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Unlike typical military cards, this one was plain white, with just a phone number and an address. There's a training facility about 2 hours north of here. They run assessment programs for civilian contractors who might work with special operations teams. The training is intensive but well compensated, and it opens doors to opportunities most people never even know exist. Sarah stared at the card, her mind racing. What kind of opportunities? Security consultation, protective services, specialized medical support in challenging environments. The skills you'd learn would make you valuable to government agencies, private military contractors, and high-end corporate security firms. Jack's voice remained steady and professional. It's not for everyone, but for the right person, it can be a path to a very different kind of life. And you think I'm the right person? Sarah asked, unable to keep skepticism out of her voice. I think you have untapped potential, Jack replied honestly. Your shooting skills are exceptional, but more importantly, you have the temperament for this kind of work. You're observant, careful, and comfortable with responsibility. Those qualities matter more than raw physical ability. Sarah turned the card over in her hands, noting its expensive feel and the absence of any identifying logos or organization names. This sounds dangerous. It can be, Jack acknowledged. But so can driving to work every day, or working in a hospital emergency room, or walking alone at night. The difference is that this kind of work teaches you how to manage and minimize those dangers rather than simply accepting them as inevitable. The appeal of that concept surprised Sarah. She had spent so much of her life feeling vulnerable, especially after her father's death had left her essentially alone in the world. The idea of learning to protect herself and others held an attraction she hadn't expected. What would the training involve? She heard herself asking. Jack's expression brightened slightly. Physical conditioning, advanced weapons training, tactical medical care, surveillance techniques, and something called situational awareness development. Essentially, they'd teach you to see threats before they become problems and to respond effectively when problems can't be avoided. Sarah thought about her nursing classes, where she was learning to recognize medical emergencies before they became critical. The parallel wasn't lost on her. How long is the training? 12 weeks for the basic program, with opportunities for specialized training afterward depending on your interests and aptitude. Jack leaned back in his chair. The commitment isn't trivial, but neither are the rewards. Graduates of this program typically earn more in a year than most nurses make in 3. The financial aspect was compelling, but Sarah found herself more interested in the challenge than the money. For the first time since her father's death, someone was suggesting she might be capable of more than she had imagined for herself. I'd need to finish nursing school first, she said, surprised by how seriously she was considering this opportunity. Actually, the medical training you're receiving now would complement the program perfectly. Many of the best contractors have backgrounds in both tactical and medical fields. Jack stood up, apparently recognizing that he had given her enough to think about. The next assessment class starts in 6 weeks. If you're interested, call that number and mention my name. After Jack left, Sarah sat alone in the office, staring at the card. Part of her wanted to tear it up and forget this conversation had ever happened. Her life was planned out. Finish nursing school, get a job at the local hospital, and settle into a quiet, stable career helping people recover from illness and injury. But another part of her was alive with possibilities she had never dared to consider. Her father had always said she was capable of extraordinary things if she ever found the courage to pursue them. Maybe it was time to find out if he had been right. That evening, Sarah called her best friend Maria, the only person who knew about her family background and shooting experience. After describing her encounter with Jack, she waited for Maria's reaction. "So let me get this straight," Maria said slowly. "A Navy SEAL wants to recommend you for some kind of secret government training program because you can shoot really well." "It's not exactly secret," Sarah protested. "And it's not just about shooting." "Sarah, honey, this sounds like something out of a movie. Are you sure this guy is legitimate?" It was a fair question and one Sarah had been asking herself. But something about Jack's demeanor and the way his team had treated her suggested this was no elaborate prank or scam. "I think I'm going to call the number," Sarah said quietly. "Are you crazy? You hate attention, you avoid confrontation, and you've never been anywhere more dangerous than downtown during rush hour. What makes you think you're cut out for whatever this is?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how to explain the feeling that had been growing inside her since that day on the shooting range. "Maybe that's exactly why I need to do this," she finally said. "Maybe it's time I found out who I really am instead of who I think I'm supposed to be." The phone call changed everything. Sarah had expected a brief conversation, maybe a request to fill out some paperwork. Instead, she found herself speaking with a woman named Colonel Jennifer Hayes, whose voice carried the kind of authority that made people sit up straighter even over the phone. "Jack Thompson spoke very highly of your potential," Colonel Hayes said after Sarah introduced herself. "But I need to be clear about what you're considering. This isn't a summer camp or a weekend warrior program. We're looking for people who can handle real responsibility in real-world situations." Sarah swallowed hard. "I understand, ma'am. Do you? Because Jack tells me you work at a shooting range and you're finishing nursing school. That's a pretty big leap from where you are to where we'd need you to be." The challenge in Colonel Hayes' voice sparked something defiant in Sarah. "My father was a military sniper with 2 combat tours. He taught me that skills matter less than the willingness to learn and the discipline to improve. I may not have extensive experience, but I'm not afraid of hard work." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Sarah worried she had overstepped. But when Colonel Hayes spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly. "Your father was Miguel Martinez?" Sarah was stunned. "You knew him?" "I knew of him. His reputation preceded him in certain circles. If you're half as determined as he was, you might just survive the first week." Another pause. "Report to the Blackwater Mountain facility next Monday at 0600 hours. Bring enough clothes for 12 weeks and be prepared to earn your place here every single day." The facility turned out to be nothing like Sarah had imagined. Instead of a military base with flags and formal buildings, she found herself at what looked like a rustic mountain resort. The main lodge was constructed of logs and stone, nestled among pine trees with a view of distant peaks. Only the high security fence and armed guards at the gate hinted at the serious nature of what happened here. Sarah was one of 16 candidates who arrived that Monday morning. The group was more diverse than she had expected. Former military personnel, law enforcement officers, emergency medical technicians, and even a few civilians like herself, who had somehow caught the attention of the program's recruiters. Colonel Hayes turned out to be a compact woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every weakness and strength of the people under her command. During their first briefing, she made the program's expectations crystal clear. "You are here to become problem solvers," she announced to the assembled candidates. "In 12 weeks, we will teach you to think tactically, shoot accurately, provide medical care under pressure, and operate effectively in environments where most people would panic. Some of you will not make it through the first month. Others will quit when you realize this work isn't what you thought it would be. Those who remain will graduate with skills that can save lives and opportunities that can change your future." The first week nearly broke Sarah. The physical conditioning was unlike anything she had experienced. Even during her brief ROTC stint, 6 a.m. runs through mountain trails, obstacle courses that seemed designed to find creative ways to exhaust every muscle group, and combat fitness drills that left her questioning every life choice that had led her to this point. But it was the weapons training that really challenged her assumptions about her own abilities. She had thought her shooting skills were solid, but the instructors quickly demonstrated the difference between range accuracy and tactical proficiency. Learning to shoot while moving, while under stress, and while making life or death decisions pushed her far beyond anything her father had taught her. "You shoot pretty when you have time to think," Instructor Davis told her after a particularly frustrating afternoon on the combat course. "But combat isn't pretty, and you won't always have time to think. We need to make your shooting instinctive, automatic, and reliable under any circumstances." The medical training was equally intense. Sarah's nursing background helped, but battlefield medicine was a completely different discipline. She learned to treat gunshot wounds, perform emergency surgery with minimal equipment, and make triage decisions under pressure. The training scenarios were realistic enough to be genuinely traumatic, designed to prepare students for situations where medical knowledge could mean the difference between life and death. But it was the tactical training that truly opened Sarah's eyes to a world she had never imagined. She learned surveillance techniques, threat assessment, and something called situational awareness that went far beyond simply being observant. The instructors taught her to read people and environments, to recognize patterns that might indicate danger, and to position herself advantageously in any situation. By the fourth week, 3 candidates had been dismissed from the program. 2 had failed the physical standards, and 1 had been caught falsifying information on his background check. Sarah found herself bonding with the remaining candidates, particularly a former Marine named David Chen and a police detective named Lisa Rodriguez. They formed an informal support network, helping each other through the most challenging aspects of the training. "You know what I find strange about you?" David asked one evening as they cleaned their weapons after a long day on the range. "You're the quietest person here, but you're also the most determined. Most people who are naturally shy don't push themselves the way you do." Sarah considered his observation while running a cleaning rod through her rifle barrel. "I think I spent a lot of years being afraid of what I might be capable of if I really tried. This feels like my chance to find out." Lisa looked up from her own weapon maintenance. "What made you decide to try? I mean, you had a normal life, a plan that made sense. Why give that up for this?" It was a question Sarah had been asking herself every day since arriving at the facility. "My father used to tell me that safety was an illusion. He said the only real security came from being prepared for whatever life threw at you." She paused, thinking about how to explain the feeling that had driven her to make this choice. "I think I got tired of pretending to be helpless when I knew I could be more." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the facility's intercom system. "All candidates report to the briefing room immediately. Full gear, weapons secured." As they hurried to comply, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of anxiety and excitement that had become routine during her time at the facility. She had no idea that this particular briefing would involve their first real-world exercise, or that the next 48 hours would test everything she had learned in ways the classroom simulations had never approached. Colonel Hayes stood at the front of the briefing room, her expression more serious than usual. Behind her, a large map covered one wall, marked with locations and symbols that meant nothing to Sarah, but clearly carried significance for the instructors. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Hayes began, "your training exercises up to this point have been preparation for this moment. You're about to participate in a realistic scenario exercise that will test every skill you've learned, and several you haven't learned yet. The scenario involves a missing persons case with potential national security implications." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't another simulation or training drill. Whatever they were about to do would involve real stakes and real consequences. "You will be working in teams of 4, Colonel Hayes continued. "Your mission parameters and individual assignments will be provided once you're in the field. Remember that your performance during this exercise will largely determine whether you graduate from this program and what opportunities are available to you afterward." As the briefing continued, Sarah realized that her quiet life at the shooting range felt like something from another person's experience. In just 4 weeks, she had begun to see the world differently, to think about problems and solutions in ways that would have been foreign to her just a month ago. She was no longer the invisible employee who preferred to blend into the background. She was becoming someone who could step forward when situations demanded action, someone who could be relied upon when others needed help. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, and she was beginning to understand that there would be no going back to who she used to be. The helicopter ride to the exercise location was Sarah's first time in military aircraft. As they flew over dense forest toward their insertion point, she tried to control the nervous energy that had been building since Colonel Hayes's briefing. Her team consisted of David Chen, Lisa Rodriguez, and a former Army Ranger named Marcus Williams who had barely spoken to anyone during their first month of training. Their mission briefing had been delivered in flight: locate and extract a missing federal witness who had disappeared from a safe house 3 days earlier. Intelligence suggested she was being held somewhere in a 50-square-mile area of mountainous terrain by unknown parties with possible connections to the case she was scheduled to testify. And this is as real as it gets without actually being real, their team leader, Instructor Peterson, told them over the helicopter's intercom. The missing person is an actress playing a role, but everything else, the terrain, the weather, the time constraints, and the consequences for failure, are genuine. Sarah checked her gear one final time as the helicopter began its descent. She carried a rifle, sidearm, medical supplies, communications equipment, and enough food and water for 3 days. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than her backpack. The insertion went smoothly. Their team rappelled into a clearing at dawn, established their initial position, and began the systematic search pattern they had been taught. But Sarah quickly discovered that applying classroom tactics in real terrain was far more challenging than any simulation had suggested. The forest was thick with underbrush that made quiet movement nearly impossible. The topographical maps, while accurate, couldn't convey the reality of navigating steep ravines and dense vegetation while maintaining tactical awareness. Within 2 hours, Sarah was exhausted, scratched by thorns, and beginning to doubt her ability to complete the mission. "Contact," Marcus whispered into his radio, freezing the entire team in place. Through hand signals, he indicated movement approximately 200 meters to their north. Sarah felt her heart rate spike as training took over, and she automatically moved to a covered position behind a fallen log. For the next 20 minutes, they observed 2 men in civilian clothes who appeared to be conducting their own patrol of the area. Sarah's optics training helped her identify details that might be important. Both men carried weapons. One had military-style boots despite civilian clothes, and they moved with the kind of discipline that suggested professional training. "Probable hostiles," David whispered through their tactical headset. "They're armed and they're looking for something." Lisa, using binoculars from a concealed position, provided additional intelligence. "Vehicle tracks leading east from their position. Fresh, probably made this morning." Sarah found herself analyzing the situation with a clarity that surprised her. The tactical training had become second nature over the past month, and she was automatically considering sight lines, escape routes, and potential courses of action. "We follow at distance," Peterson decided. "Maintain visual contact, but don't engage unless they threaten the package or compromise our mission." For the next several hours, Sarah's team shadowed the 2 suspects through increasingly difficult terrain. The skills she had learned during surveillance training proved invaluable, as they maintained contact while remaining undetected. But the physical demands were enormous, and Sarah could feel her endurance being tested in ways no gym workout had ever approached. Just after noon, the suspects led them to an abandoned hunting cabin in a remote valley. Through careful observation from concealed positions on the surrounding ridge, Sarah's team confirmed that this was likely where the missing witness was being held. Smoke rose from the cabin's chimney, and they could observe at least 3 additional suspects moving around the structure. 5 confirmed hostiles, unknown number inside the structure, Peterson summarized in his mission report. "Package location probable but not confirmed. Recommend immediate extraction planning." This was where Sarah's medical training became crucial. During their observation period, she noticed that one of the suspects appeared to be limping and favoring his left arm. Her medical eye automatically assessed his condition and potential threat level. "Hostile number 3 shows signs of recent injury," she reported. "Probably not combat effective if we need to engage." Peterson nodded approvingly. "Good observation. What's your medical assessment of our approach options?" Sarah considered the tactical situation from a medical perspective, something she had never thought about before her training began. "If we need to extract an injured package, the terrain between here and the cabin is going to complicate evacuation. We should identify multiple extraction routes in case our primary plan fails." The complexity of their situation was becoming clear. A direct assault would likely succeed, but could endanger the witness. A stealth approach would take time they might not have, especially if the suspects decided to move their prisoner. Peterson made the decision to divide their team. with Sarah and Lisa providing overwatch while David and Marcus moved closer to the cabin for reconnaissance. As Sarah settled into a sniper's position overlooking the target area, she felt a strange combination of anxiety and confidence. The rifle felt natural in her hands, and her father's training merged seamlessly with everything she had learned over the past month. But this was the first time she had aimed a weapon at another human being, with the possibility that she might need to fire. "Overwatch in position," she reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was contemplating. Through her scope, Sarah could see David and Marcus moving with impressive stealth toward the cabin. Her job was to provide cover if they were detected, and to engage any threats that might prevent successful extraction of the witness. The wait was the hardest part. For 45 minutes, Sarah maintained her position while David and Marcus gathered intelligence on the cabin and its occupants. Her muscles ached from remaining motionless, but she forced herself to stay focused on her sector of responsibility. "Package confirmed." David's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Female, mid-20s, appears uninjured but restrained in the back room. 5 hostiles confirmed, weapons visible." Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. The mission was real now, with a person who needed their help just 200 meters away. Through her scope, she tracked the movements of the suspects, noting their patrol patterns and identifying potential threats to her teammates. "Movement on the ridge," Lisa whispered urgently. "Additional hostiles approaching from the east." Sarah shifted her scope toward Lisa's position and immediately spotted 3 more armed men making their way toward the cabin. The tactical situation had just become significantly more complex. What had been a manageable 5-on-4 scenario was now 8 armed suspects against their team of 4. "Abort and extract?" Peterson asked over the radio, his voice tense with the weight of command decision. Sarah found herself speaking before she fully realized she had made a decision. "Negative. Package is in immediate danger if we withdraw. I have clear shots on 3 hostiles from this position." The silence that followed her statement seemed to stretch forever. Sarah realized she had just volunteered to engage multiple armed targets in a real-world scenario, something that would have been unthinkable to her just months earlier. "Confirmed. Overwatch," Peterson finally responded. "You are authorized to engage on my command." What happened next unfolded with a speed and intensity that Sarah's training had prepared her for but couldn't fully simulate. The 3 approaching suspects were spotted by the original group, leading to a brief consultation that ended with 2 of them heading directly toward David and Marcus's position. "They're blown," Lisa reported, moving to assist. Sarah watched through her scope as her teammates were forced to engage the suspects sooner than planned. David's position was compromised when one of the approaching men literally stumbled over him in the underbrush. The forest erupted with gunfire as both sides engaged. Training took over. Sarah's first shot dropped the suspect who had discovered David, giving her teammate time to reach better cover. Her second shot disabled the injured suspect she had identified earlier, removing him from the fight. The precision shooting her father had taught her, combined with months of tactical training, made her an effective part of the team's response. But the real test came when she saw one of the remaining suspects moving toward the cabin's back door, clearly intending to use the witness as a human shield. Sarah had a clear shot, but it required firing past Lisa's position and accounting for wind that had picked up during the afternoon. "Taking the shot," she announced, her voice calm despite her racing heart. The bullet struck exactly where she had aimed, incapacitating the threat without endangering anyone else. In that moment, Sarah understood that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. She was no longer someone who hoped she might be brave in a crisis. She was someone who had been tested and had acted decisively when it mattered. The firefight lasted less than 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. When the dust settled, all hostile threats had been neutralized. The witness had been successfully extracted, and Sarah's team had proven they could operate effectively under real pressure. During the helicopter ride back to base, Peterson sat next to Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. "That was exceptional shooting under pressure," he said. "But more importantly, your tactical decisions showed mature judgment. You thought about the mission and the safety of your teammates before considering your own position." Sarah nodded, still processing what had happened. "I kept thinking about what my father would do in the same situation. He always said that protecting others was the highest purpose for these skills." "Your father raised you well," Peterson replied, "and this program has given you the tools to honor his lessons. You should be proud of what you accomplished today." As the helicopter approached their base, Sarah realized that she felt different than she had that morning. The quiet, invisible woman who had replaced targets at a shooting range was gone, replaced by someone who could be counted on when lives hung in the balance. The transformation wasn't complete. She still had 8 weeks of training ahead of her. But she now knew with certainty that she belonged in this world. Colonel Hayes was waiting when they landed, her expression revealing nothing about how their exercise had been evaluated. But when she approached Sarah individually after the team debriefing, her words carried weight that Sarah would remember for years to come. "Outstanding performance today, Martinez. You've demonstrated that you have not just the skills but the character for this work. The next phase of your training will prepare you for opportunities that very few people ever get to consider." That night, Sarah called Maria to share what she could about her experience without violating security protocols. "I can't tell you details," she said, "but I think I'm becoming the person I was always meant to be." "You sound different," Maria observed. "More confident, but also more serious." "This work changes you," Sarah admitted. "I'm starting to understand that my father saw something in me that I never saw in myself, and now I'm finally growing into it." The final month of training pushed Sarah beyond every limit she thought she had. After the successful field exercise, Colonel Hayes had quietly moved her into an accelerated track with only 5 other candidates who had shown exceptional aptitude. The advanced training included specialized skills that Sarah had never imagined: advanced surveillance, protective detail work, and something called executive protection in hostile environments. "You're no longer training to be a contractor," Instructor Davis explained to their elite group. "You're training to be someone who can operate independently in situations where failure means people die." The intensity was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. 18-hour training days became routine, covering everything from advanced medical procedures to close-quarters combat. But it was the psychological preparation that proved most challenging. They learned to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure, to compartmentalize emotions during crisis situations, and to maintain operational effectiveness even when personally threatened. Discovered she had a natural talent for what the instructors called threat assessment. Her years of observing people from the background at the shooting range had developed skills she hadn't recognized. She could read body language, identify suspicious behavior, and spot potential problems before they escalated into immediate threats. "You see things other people miss," Lisa observed during one of their surveillance exercises. "It's like you have built-in radar for trouble." The comment struck Sarah as accurate. She had always been hyper-aware of her surroundings, a trait that had kept her safe during her years of working alone and living independently. Now that awareness was being refined into a professional skill that made her valuable to teams working in dangerous environments. 3 weeks before graduation, Colonel Hayes called Sarah into her office for what she said would be a career counseling session. Sarah had been expecting this conversation, knowing that high-performing candidates were often recruited for specific positions before completing the program. "Your instructors tell me you're among the top performers we've seen in several years," Colonel Hayes began. "Your shooting scores are exceptional, your tactical judgment is mature, and your medical skills give you versatility that most candidates lack." Sarah waited, sensing that this praise was leading somewhere significant. "I've received inquiries about you from several organizations," Colonel Hayes continued. "State Department security, Federal Protective Services, and a private firm that provides security for high-profile clients. All of them are interested in hiring you immediately upon graduation." The prospect should have been exciting, but Sarah found herself hesitating. "What kind of work would I be doing?" "That depends on which opportunity interests you most. State Department would likely assign you to embassy security or protective details for diplomats in high-risk locations. Federal Protective Service handles threats against judges, prosecutors, and federal witnesses. The private sector offers the highest compensation, but also the most unpredictable assignments." Sarah considered her options carefully. Each path represented a dramatic departure from anything she had previously imagined for her life. "What would you recommend?" Colonel Hayes smiled. "That's not a decision I can make for you. But I will say this: you have the temperament and skills for any of these positions. The question is what kind of impact you want to make with your career." That evening, Sarah found herself alone on the facility's outdoor range, working through her thoughts while practicing precision shots at long distance. The routine had become meditative for her, a way to process complex decisions while maintaining her skills. She was surprised when Jack Thompson appeared beside her shooting position. She hadn't seen him since their first meeting at the civilian range, though she had heard he was occasionally involved in advanced training scenarios. "Colonel Hayes tells me you're wrestling with some big decisions," he said. Settling into a chair beside her shooting mat, Sarah lowered her rifle and turned to face him. "I keep thinking about something you said when we first met. About the difference between natural ability and learned skills." Jack nodded. "I remember. I've learned the skills now," Sarah continued, "but I'm not sure I understand what I'm supposed to do with them. 6 months ago I was planning to be a nurse in a small hospital. Now I'm being offered jobs that could take me anywhere in the world." "What does your instinct tell you?" Jack asked. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, considering his question. "I think about my father a lot. He used to say that skills without purpose were just tricks. That real meaning came from using your abilities to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Sounds like you already know what you want to do." "I think I want to help people who are in real danger, not just provide security for wealthy clients who want to feel important, but actually make a difference when it matters most." Jack smiled. "There might be an opportunity that would interest you. It's not one of the standard career tracks Colonel Hayes mentioned." This caught Sarah's attention. "What kind of opportunity?" "A joint task force that handles cases involving threats to federal witnesses, judges, and prosecutors. It's dangerous work, but it's exactly the kind of situation where your skills could save innocent lives." Sarah felt something click into place in her mind. This was why she had pushed herself through months of grueling training, why she had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed. Not for money or prestige, but to be someone who could step forward when others needed protection. "Tell me more about this task force." Jack's expression became more serious. "I can't provide details until you've made a commitment, but I will say this. It's work that matters. The people you'd be protecting are often in danger because they chose to do the right thing, even when it put them at risk. They deserve someone watching their backs who has the skills and dedication to keep them alive." Over the next week, Sarah completed her final training exercises with a clarity of purpose she had never experienced. She knew what she wanted to do with her life, and more importantly, she knew she had the abilities to do it well. Graduation was a small, private ceremony attended only by the candidates, instructors, and a few officials from agencies that employed program graduates. Sarah received her certification with a sense of accomplishment that was deeper than any academic achievement she had ever earned. But the real validation came when Colonel Hayes approached her after the ceremony. "I understand you've accepted a position with the Joint Task Force." "Yes, ma'am. I think it's where I can do the most good." "It's challenging work," Colonel Hayes warned. "You'll be dealing with cases where the stakes are life and death, often with minimal backup and limited resources." Sarah nodded. "My father always said that the most important battles are fought by people nobody ever hears about." Colonel Hayes extended her hand. "Then I think you're ready for this. Your father would be proud of who you've become." As Sarah left the facility that afternoon, she realized that her transformation was complete in some ways, and just beginning in others. She was no longer the invisible woman who had replaced targets at a shooting range, but she wasn't yet the person she would ultimately become. That growth would happen in the field, where her training would be tested against real threats and real consequences. But for the first time in her adult life, Sarah felt genuinely confident about her future. She had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed, developed skills that could make a real difference in the world, and found a purpose that gave meaning to all the challenges she had overcome. Most importantly, she had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear when action was necessary. It was a lesson that would serve her well in the dangerous and unpredictable work that lay ahead. 2 years later, Sarah stood in the shadows of a federal courthouse, her trained eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. Her earpiece crackled with updates from her team as they maintained security around Judge Patricia Henley, who had been receiving death threats for months due to her involvement in a high-profile organized crime case. The transformation from range employee to federal protection specialist had been complete, but it hadn't been easy. Sarah's first year with the Joint Task Force had tested every skill she had learned, and several she had to develop on the job. She had protected witnesses in safe houses, provided security for trials involving dangerous criminals, and worked cases that regularly made national headlines. But it was the quieter victories that gave her the most satisfaction. The prosecutor who could sleep at night knowing someone was watching her family. The witness who found the courage to testify because he trusted his protection team. The judge who could make difficult decisions without fearing for his safety. Movement on the east side came the voice of her partner, Agent Rodriguez, through her earpiece. Two males mid-30s moving against pedestrian flow. Sarah shifted her position to get a better view while maintaining her cover among the courthouse visitors. Her training had taught her to spot anomalies, people whose behavior didn't match their surroundings, whose body language suggested hostile intent, whose positioning indicated potential threat assessment. Visual confirmed, she responded, both subjects showing signs of surveillance behavior. Recommend enhanced alertness. This was the kind of moment Sarah had trained for. Not the dramatic shootouts that movies depicted, but the careful observation and threat assessment that prevented dangerous situations from escalating. Most days, her job involved identifying and neutralizing threats before they became immediate dangers. The two subjects turned out to be journalists trying to get unauthorized photos of Judge Henley. Sarah and her team intercepted them professionally, explaining the security restrictions and escorting them to an appropriate media area. Crisis averted through vigilance rather than violence. After successfully concluding Judge Henley's protection detail that afternoon, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since that day Jack Thompson had handed her his rifle. She had gone from someone who tried to remain invisible to someone whose job was protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Her phone rang as she was completing her paperwork for the day. The caller ID showed Jack Thompson's name, and Sarah smiled as she answered. He had become something of a mentor to her, checking in occasionally and sometimes providing intelligence for cases her task force was handling. "How's the protection business treating you?" Jack asked. "Busy," Sarah replied. 3 active cases, and we just got word about a 4th that might require my medical background. Actually, that's why I'm calling. I have an opportunity I think might interest you." Sarah had learned to pay attention when Jack used that particular tone. His opportunities had a way of changing her life in significant ways. What kind of opportunity? There's a new initiative being launched. International Protective Services for high-value witnesses and officials in hostile environments. They're looking for people with your specific combination of skills: tactical proficiency, medical training, and the ability to operate independently in unpredictable situations. Sarah felt the familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension that came with new challenges. Where would this work take place? Anywhere there are people who need protection, and local law enforcement isn't sufficient to provide it. Could be domestic, could be international. The assignment variety would be significant. And the team? Small, elite, highly mobile. You'd be working with people at your skill level on cases that regular protective services can't handle. Jack paused. It's a step up from what you're doing now, but it's also more demanding and potentially more dangerous. Sarah looked around the task force office where she had spent the last 2 years. She had grown comfortable here, developed effective partnerships with her colleagues, and established a routine that felt sustainable. But she also recognized the restless feeling that had been growing lately, the sense that she was ready for greater challenges. "When would this start?" she asked. "Next month if you're interested. There's a brief additional training period to learn some specialized techniques. Then you'd be assigned to your first case." That evening, Sarah called Maria to discuss the opportunity. Their friendship had remained strong despite Sarah's dramatic career change, though Maria still sometimes expressed amazement at her transformation. "So let me understand this," Maria said. "You've gone from replacing paper targets to protecting federal judges, and now someone wants you to do international security work." "That's a simplified version, but essentially accurate," Sarah replied. "Are you happy with this life? I mean really happy, not just satisfied with accomplishing difficult things?" It was a question Sarah had been asking herself regularly. "I think about my father a lot. He used to tell me that some people are meant for quiet lives, and that's perfectly fine, but other people are meant to stand between danger and the people who need protection. I think I'm one of those people. You sound sure of yourself in a way you never did before. I've learned what I'm capable of when it matters. That's given me confidence I never had before." 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself at a new training facility. this one even more discreet than the mountain location where her journey had begun. Her fellow candidates were drawn from elite units around the world, former Special Forces operators, experienced federal agents, and international protection specialists with years of field experience. The training was brief but intensive, focusing on protocols for working in foreign countries, cultural awareness for international assignments, and advanced communication techniques for coordinating with local law enforcement and international agencies. But the real education came during her first assignment. Sarah was tasked with providing security for a United Nations human rights investigator who was documenting war crimes in a region where previous investigators had been threatened and attacked. The work required all of her skills: tactical awareness, medical training, threat assessment, and the ability to operate effectively in an unfamiliar and dangerous environment. For 3 weeks, Sarah maintained security for the investigator while he interviewed witnesses, examined evidence, and compiled reports that would eventually be used in international court proceedings. There were no dramatic confrontations, but there were daily challenges that required quick thinking, cultural sensitivity, and the kind of situational awareness that her training had developed. The assignment concluded successfully, with the investigator's report being submitted safely and its author returning home unharmed. For Sarah, it represented the culmination of a journey that had begun with a simple moment of curiosity at a shooting range. On her flight home, Sarah thought about the choices that had brought her to this point. Each decision had seemed small at the time: accepting Jack's challenge to shoot his rifle, calling the number on his business card, pushing through the difficult training, choosing meaningful work over easier alternatives. But collectively, those choices had transformed her from someone who hoped she might be brave in a crisis to someone who could be counted on when courage was actually required. She had learned that heroism wasn't about dramatic gestures or extraordinary circumstances, but about the willingness to develop necessary skills and use them when others needed protection. As the plane descended toward her home airport, Sarah smiled at the memory of her father's words about courage being action despite fear. She had finally learned what he meant, and more importantly, she had become the person he had always believed she could be. The quiet woman who had once replaced targets at a shooting range was gone forever. In her place was someone who could stand confidently between danger and the innocent, someone whose skills and courage made the world a little bit safer for people who deserved protection. It had been a long journey from that first moment when Jack Thompson handed her his rifle, but Sarah knew with absolute certainty that every challenge, every moment of doubt, and every difficult decision had been worth it. She had found her purpose, and more importantly, she had found herself.